All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, and let's start off on a new book tonight. Well, new is relative. Let's start in on a very, very old book tonight. Welcome back, everyone. This is our first night of reading a new series. We'll be reading Genji Monogatari. That is, Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. This is lauded widely as the world's oldest novel. And there goes my camera. We're off to a stupendous start tonight. There we are. So, I am something on a bit of a time crunch today. I have had all sorts of a day. So, bear with me for just a moment. I do have another audio track lined up. I just need to get it imported into OBS and the Stream Deck here. So, just a moment. We'll do a little bit of what should have been homework, but you know what? I may have selected this book about 10 minutes ago. So, for all that we've got so far, you know what? I'll take this as a win. We're working on it. Alright, so let's get the media source in. What was that one? Loop, restart when it's active. It's probably very loud, so hang tight. I think this, hopefully, is fitting. We'll see how it goes. I didn't actually give a full listen to this track. If we have to swap it out, so be it. Yeah, so this, yeah, as I was saying, we've had a bit of a bias, and that is understandable, given that, you know, Western lit is what I know. It's what I've read. I've read a fair bit of other things, but as far as like general day-to-day and exposure, Western's kind of where it's at as far as like where I'm at. So it's good to change gears some, and this is as good a place as any that I can think of. I have read this before. It was for class, so how much attention was paid, we'll give it some leeway either way. But it is what it is. It is a very well-known piece. As I'd mentioned, it is generally accepted as the world's oldest novel. Written by a woman as well, which is, you know, plus. And it's giving all sorts of different vibes that we may not have come across before. Given the time it was written and the culture, you may need to give a little bit of patience to some of the things that are going on. But, I mean, what have we read that doesn't come with any strings attached, right? That's what I thought. So, we are all aware of the drill by now. And let's drop that there. I'm almost ready here. There we are. Alright, so I have that loaded up into the Stream Deck. I've got everything ready to go. We've got the new BGM. We have the sound. I've got my drink. Cats are already coming to join us. As might be expected, I was on the road for about 6 hours today, so they're a little attention-starved. Yes, isn't that right, Simba? Alright, well, that's enough preamble for me. I did actually, though, given the fact that we had just now gotten our post out for the stream, I do need to get it out to socials. Hang on, we are almost done with the homework now. Ever so near. I'm not sure about this BGM. We'll see. If we have to go back to the other, to one of the stock ones, we can. It sounds fine, but I'm not sure that it is good for this tune. Go. We'll repost my own notice here. Give you a switcheroo here, and bop, bop, bap. All right. And the camera went out again. Fantastic. Wonderful, even. Alright, hang on. This time I'm not sure it's the camera, the USB, or just VTube Studio doesn't like us. We'll see. Alright. Now, I promise we're actually done with the homework now, and we can get into the book. So, let's go ahead and start in with something fresh, something new, something old, something blue. Did we borrow this? I don't know. We'll see. All right, I'm meandering now. All right, so this is the translation of The Tale of Genji by, where's the translator here? Translated by Arthur Whaley. So this is one of the older translations as well. So this is a relatively early edition. This has been split into, I think, 4 volumes. What we have here is the first volume, and the camera went out again. Good Lord. All right, hang on. We're going to try something now. I'm going to try a different USB port. Certainly, that will solve the problem, right? So it's a less than flattering freeze frame. All right. And while we're at it, I do believe when tracking is lost, we're going back to default pose, because we'd rather not go through with that again. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. All right. As I was saying, this is the Tale of Genji Monogatari, written by Murasaki Shikibu, translated by Arthur Whaley. This is one of the earlier translations, one of the earlier editions. This has been split into 4 volumes. We have here the first, which is going to cover a fair bit of it, actually. We'll set the groundwork and really be introduced to a lot of different things. This is kind of well known for being really a very good fit for us, because we meander and wander, so does this book. So we've got a lot to go through, but it is, if we're just doing this first volume, it's a manageable size. All right, let's go ahead and begin. It's been 10 minutes of preamble now. And so, The Tale of Genji Monogatari, Chapter 1, Kiritsubo. At the court of an emperor, he lived, it matters not when. There was among the many gentlewomen of the wardrobe and chamber one who, though she was not of very high rank, was favored far beyond all the rest, so that the great ladies of the palace, each of whom had secretly hoped that she herself would be chosen, looked with scorn and hatred upon the upstart who had dispelled their dreams. Still less were her former companions, the minor ladies of the wardrobe, content to see her raised so far above them. Thus, her position at court, preponderant though it was, exposed her to constant jealousy and ill will, and soon, worn out with petty vexations, she fell into a decline, growing very melancholy and retiring frequently to her home. But the emperor, so far from wearying of her now that she was no longer well or gay, grew every day more tender, and paid not the smallest heed to those who reproved him, till his conduct became the talk of all the land, and even his own barons and courtiers began to look askance at an attachment so ill-advised. They whispered among themselves that, in the land beyond the sea, such happenings had led to riot and disaster. The people of the country did indeed soon have many grievances to show, and some likened her to Yang Hufei, the mistress of Ming Huang. Yet, for all this discontent, so great was the sheltering power of her master's love that none dared openly molest her. So, reminder, given that we've now left our comfortable Western biases behind, there will be many references, particularly to historical figures, that we may have no idea what is being referenced, may have no inclination of the nuances there. And you know what? Deal with it. There are footnotes, but I won't be reading them. Her father, who had been a counselor, was dead. Her mother, who never forgot that the father was in his day a man of some consequence, managed, despite all difficulties, to give her as good an upbringing as generally falls to the lot of young ladies whose parents are alive and at the height of fortune. It would have helped matters greatly if there had been some influential guardian to busy himself on the child's behalf. Unfortunately, the mother was entirely alone in the world, and sometimes, when troubles came, she felt very bitterly the lack of anyone to whom she could turn for comfort and advice. But to return to the daughter, in due time she bore him a little prince, who, perhaps because in some previous life a close bond had joined them, turned out as fine and likely a man-child as well might be in all the land. The emperor could hardly contain himself during the days of waiting, but when, at the earliest possible moment, the child was presented at court, he saw that rumor had not exaggerated its beauty. His eldest-born prince was the son of Lady Kokuden, the daughter of the Minister of the Right. And this child was treated by all with the respect due to an undoubted heir apparent. But he was not so fine a child as the new prince. Moreover, the emperor's great affection for the new child's mother made him feel the boy to be in a peculiar sense his own possession. Unfortunately, he was not of the same rank, or she was not of the same rank as the courtiers who waited upon him in the upper palace, so that despite his love for her, and though she wore all the airs of a great lady, it was not without considerable qualms that he now made it his practice to have her by him not only when there was to be some entertainment, but even when any business of importance was afoot. Sometimes, indeed, he would keep her when he woke in the morning, not letting her go back to her lodging, so that willy-nilly she acted the part of a lady in perpetual attendance. Seeing all this, Lady Kokiden began to fear that the new prince, for whom the emperor seemed to have so marked a preference, would, if she did not take care soon, be promoted to the Eastern Palace. But she had, after all, priority over her rival. The emperor had loved her devotedly, and she had borne him princes. It was even now, chiefly, the fear of her reproaches that made him uneasy about his new way of life. Thus, though his mistress could be sure of his protection, there were many who sought to humiliate her, and she felt so weak in herself that it seemed to her at last as though all the honors heaped upon her had brought with them terror rather than joy. Her lodging was in the wing called Kiritsubo. It was but natural that the many ladies whose doors she had to pass on her repeated journeys to the emperor's room should have grown exasperated. And sometimes, when these comings and goings became frequent beyond measure, it would happen that on bridges and in corridors here or there along the way that she must go, strange tricks were played to frighten her, or unpleasant things were left lying about which spoiled the dresses of the ladies who accompanied her. Once, indeed, someone locked the door of a portico, so that the poor thing wandered this way and that for a great while in sore distress. So many were the miseries into which this state of affairs now daily brought her, that the emperor could no longer endure to witness her vexations, and moved her to Koroten. In order to make room for her, he was obliged to shift the chief lady of the wardrobe to lodgings outside. So far from improving matters, he had merely produced her a new and most embittered enemy. So, if you're a fan of any sort of, villainous anime or the like, it's all rooted very, very deeply in the fictions of Japanese lit and such, given that this is about as far back as it goes, and this is exactly that sort of thing. Exactly. The young prince was now 3 years old. The putting on of the trousers was performed with as much ceremony as in the case of the heir apparent. Marvelous gifts flowed from the imperial treasury and tribute house. This too incurred the censure of many, but brought no enmity to the child himself, for his growing beauty and the charm of his disposition were a wonder and delight to all who met him. Indeed, many persons of ripe experience confessed themselves astounded that such a creature should actually have been born in these latter and degenerate days. Oh yes, even in the single-digit centuries, it was well known that the old days were so much better. In the summer of that year, the lady became very downcast. She repeatedly asked for leave to go to her home, but it was not granted. For a year she continued in the same state. The emperor, to all her entreaties, answered only, "Try for a little while longer." But she was getting worse every day, and when it was 5 or 6 days she had been growing steadily weaker. Her mother sent to the palace a tearful plea for her release. Fearing even now that her enemies might contrive to put some unimaginable shame upon her, the sick lady left her son behind and prepared to quit the palace in secret. The emperor knew that the time had come when, little as he liked it, he must let her go. But that she should slip away without a word of farewell was more than he could bear, and he hastened to her side. He found her still charming and beautiful, but her face was very thin and wan. She looked at him tenderly, saying nothing. Was she alive? So faint was the dwindling spark that she scarcely seemed so. Suddenly, forgetting all that had happened and all that was to come, he called her by 100 pretty names and, weeping, showered upon her 1,000 caresses. But she made no answer. For sounds and sights reached her but faintly. She seemed dazed. As one that scarcely remembered, she lay upon a bed. Seeing her thus, he knew not what to do. In great trouble and perplexity, he sent for a hand litter. But when they would have laid her in it, he forbade them, saying, "There was an oath between us, that neither should go alone upon the road that all at last must tread. How can I now let her go from me?" The lady heard him, and "At last," she said, "though that desired at last become, because I go alone, how gladly would I live." Thus, with faint voice and failing breath, she whispered, but though she had found strength to speak, each word was uttered with great toil and pain. Come what might, the emperor would have watched by her till the end, but that the priests who were to read the intercession had already been dispatched to her home. She must be brought there before nightfall, and, at last, he forced himself to let the bearers carry her away. He tried to sleep, but felt stifled, and could not close his eyes. All night long, messengers were coming and going between her home and the palace. From the first, they brought no good news, and soon after midnight announced that this time, on arriving at the house, they had heard a noise of wailing and lamentation, and learned from those within that the lady had just breathed her last. The emperor lay motionless, as though he had not understood. Though his father was so fond of his company, it was thought better, after this event, that the prince should go away from the palace. He did not understand what had happened, but seeing the servants all wringing their hands and the emperor himself continually weeping, he felt that it must have been something very terrible. He knew that even quite ordinary separations made people unhappy, but here was such a dismal wailing and lamenting as he had never seen before. And he concluded that this must be some very extraordinary kind of parting. When the time came for the funeral to begin, the girl's mother cried out that the smoke of her own body would be seen rising beside the smoke of her child's bier. She rode in the same coach with the court ladies who had come to the funeral. The ceremony took place at Otago, and was celebrated with great splendor. So overpowering was the mother's affection that so long as she looked on the body, she still thought of her child as alive. It was only when they lighted the pyre she suddenly realized that what lay upon it was a corpse. Then, though she tried to speak sensibly, she reeled and almost fell from the coach, and those with her turned to one another and said, "At last she knows." A herald came from the palace and read a proclamation which promoted the dead lady to the 3rd rank. The reading of this long proclamation by the bier was a sad business. The emperor repented bitterly that he had not long ago made her a lady-in-waiting, and that was why he now raised her rank by 1 degree. There were many who grudged her even this honor, but some less stubborn began now to recall that she had indeed been a lady of uncommon beauty, and others that she had very gentle and pleasing manners, while some went so far as to say it was a shame that anybody should have disliked so sweet a lady, and that, if she had not been singled out unfairly from the rest, no one would have said a word against her. Damn, that's all kind of backbiting there. Ooh. The 7 weeks of mourning were, by the emperor's order, minutely observed. Time passed, but he still lived in rigid seclusion from the ladies of the court. The servants who waited upon him had a sad life, for he wept almost without ceasing, both day and night. Kokiden and the other great ladies were still relentless, and went without saying it looked as though the emperor would be no less foolishly obsessed by her memory than he had been by her person. He did indeed sometimes see Kokiden's son, the firstborn prince, but this only made him long the more to see the dead lady's child, and he was always sending trusted servants, such as his own old nurse, to report to him upon the boy's progress. The time of the autumn equinox had come. Already the touch of the evening air was cold upon the skin. So many memories crowded upon him that he sent a girl, the daughter of his quiver-bearer, with a letter to the dead lady's house. It was beautiful, moonlit weather, and after he had dispatched the messenger, he lingered for a while, gazing out into the night. It was at such times as this that he had been wont to call for music. He remembered how her words, lightly whispered, had blended with those strangely fashioned harmonies. Remembered how all was strange. Her face, her air, her form. He thought of the poem which says that real things in the darkness seem no realer than dreams, and he longed for even so dim a substance as the dream life of those nights. The messenger had reached the gates of the house. She pushed them back, and a strange sight met her eyes. Such a strange sight as my camera die, once again. I do believe I need to go to Best Buy tomorrow. It is that time, I think. Alright. The old lady had for long been a widow, and the whole charge of keeping the domain in repair had fallen upon her daughter. But since her death, the mother, sunk in age and despair, had done nothing to the place, and everywhere the weeds grew high, and to all this desolation was added the wildness of the autumn gale. Great clumps of mugwort grew so thick that only the moonlight could penetrate them. The messenger alighted at the entrance of the house. At first the mother could find no words with which to greet her, but soon she said, "Alas, I have lingered too long in the world. I cannot bear to think that so fine a messenger as you have pressed your way through the dewy thickets that bar the road to my house." And she burst into uncontrollable weeping. Then Quiverbearer's daughter said, "One of the palace maids who came here told his majesty that her heart had been torn with pity at what she saw, and I, madam, am in like case." Then, after a little hesitation, she repeated the emperor's message. "For a while I searched in the darkness of my mind, groping for an exit from my dream. But, after long pondering, I can find no way to wake. There is none here to counsel me. Will you not come to me secretly? It is not well that the young prince should spend his days in so desolate and sad a place. Let him come too." This he said, and much else, but confusedly, and with many sighs. And I, seeing that the struggle to hide his grief from me was costing him dear, hurried away from the palace, without hearing all. But here is a letter that he sent. "My sight is dim," said the mother. "Let me hold his letter to the light," the letter said. I had thought that after a while there might be some blurring, some slight effacement, but no. As days and months go by, the more senseless, the more unendurable becomes my life. I am continually thinking of the child, wondering how he fares. I had hoped that his mother and I together would watch over his upbringing. Will you not take her place in this, and bring him to me as a memory of the past?" Such was the letter, and many instructions were added to it together, with a poem that said, "At the sound of the wind that binds the cold dew on Takagi Moor, my heart goes out to the tender lilac stems." It was of the young prince that he spoke in symbol, but she did not read the letter to the end. At last, the mother said, "Though I know that long life means only bitterness, I have stayed so long in the world that even before the pine tree of Takasago I should hide my head in shame. How, then, should I find courage to go hither and thither in the great palace of 100 towers? Though the august summons should call me time and again, myself, could not obey. But the young prince, whether he may have heard the august wish I know not, is impatient to return, and, what is small wonder, seems very downcast in this place. Tell his majesty this, and whatever else of my thoughts you have here learnt from me. For a little child, this house is indeed a sorry place. They say that the child is asleep, the quiver-bearer's daughter answered. I should like to have seen him and told the emperor how he looks, but I am awaited at the palace, and it must be late. She was hastening away, but the mother, since even those who wander in the darkness of their own black thoughts can gain by converse a momentary beam to guide their steps, I pray you sometimes to visit me of your own accord, and when you are at leisure. For Pete's sake. Alright, this camera is going to be the death of me. In years past, it was at times of joy and triumph that you came to this house. And now this is the news you bring? Foolish are they indeed who trust to fortune. From the time she was born until his death, her father, who knew his own mind, would have it that she must go to court and charge me again and again not to disappoint his wishes if he were to die. And so, though I thought that the lack of a guardian would bring her into many difficulties, I was determined to carry out his desire. At court, she found that favours only too great were to be hers, and all the while must needs endure in secrecy the tokens of inhuman malice, till hatred had heaped upon her so heavy a load of cares that she died as it were murdered. Indeed, the love that in his wisdom he deigned to show her, or sometimes it seems to me in uncomprehending darkness of my heart, was crueler than indifference. So she spoke, till tears would let her speak no more. And now the night had come. All this, the girl answered, he himself has said, and further, that thus against my will and judgment I yielded helplessly to a passion so reckless that it caused men's eyes to blink, was perhaps decreed for the very reason that our time was fated to be so short. It was the wild and vehement passion of those who are marked down for instant separation. And though I had vowed that none should suffer because of my love, yet, in the end, she bore upon her shoulders the heavy hatred of many who thought that for her sake they had been wronged. So again and again have I heard the Emperor speak with tears. But now the night is far spent, and I must carry my message to the palace before day comes. So she, weeping too, spoke as she hurried away. But the sinking moon was shining in a cloudless sky, and in the grass clumps that shivered in the cold wind, bell crickets tinkled their compelling cry. It was hard to leave these grass clumps, and the quiver-bearer's daughter, loath to ride away, recited the poem which says, ceaseless as the interminable voices of the bell cricket, all night till dawn my tears flow. The mother answered, upon the thickets that teem with myriad insect voices falls the dew of a cloud-dweller's tears. For the people of the court are called dwellers above the clouds. Then she gave the messenger a sash, a comb, and other things that the dead lady had left in her keeping, gifts from the emperor which now, since their use was gone, she sent back to him as mementos of the past. The nursemaids who had come with the boy were depressed not so much at their mistress's death, as at suddenly being deprived of the daily sights and sensations of the palace. They begged to go back at once, but the mother was determined not to go herself, knowing that she would cut too forlorn a figure. On the other hand, if she parted with the boy, she would be daily in great anxiety about him. That was why she did not immediately either go with him herself or send him to the palace. The quiver-bearer's daughter found the emperor still awake. He was, upon pretext of visiting the flower pots in front of the palace, which were then in full bloom, waiting for her out of doors, while 5 or 6 trusted ladies conversed with him. At this time, it was his wont to examine morning and evening a picture of the everlasting wrong, the text written by Teiji no In, with poems by Ise and Tsurayuki, both in Yamato speech, and in that of the men beyond the sea, and the story of this poem was the common matter of his talk. Now, he turned to the messenger, and asked eagerly for all her news, and when she had given him a secret and faithful account of the sad place whence she had come, she handed him the mother's letter. His Majesty's gracious commands I read with reverence deeper than I can express, but their purport has brought great darkness and confusion to my mind. All this, together with a poem in which she compared her grandchild to a flower which has lost the tree that sheltered it from the great winds, was so wild and so ill-writ as only to be suffered from the hand of one whose sorrow was as yet unhealed. Now, again, the emperor strove for self-possession in the presence of his messenger. But, as he pictured to himself the time when the dead lady first came to him, 1,000 memories pressed thick about him. And recollection linked to recollection carried him onward, till he shuddered to think how utterly unmarked, unheeded, all these hours and days had fled. At last he said, I too thought much, and with delight, how with most profit might be fulfilled the wish that her father, the counsellor, left behind him. But of that no more. If the young prince lives, occasion may yet be found. It is for his long life that we must pray. He looked at the presents she had brought back, and would that, like the wizard, you had brought a kingfisher hairpin as token of your visit to the place where her spirit dwells, he cried, and recited the poem, Oh, for a master of magic who might go and seek her, and by a message teach me where her spirit dwells. For the picture of Kuefei, skillful though the painter might be, was but the work of a brush, and had no living fragrance, and though the poet tells us that Kuefei's grace was as that of the hibiscus of the royal lake or the willows of the Weiyang Palace, the lady in the picture was all paint and powder, had a simpering, Chineseified air. But when he thought of the lost lady's voice and form, he could find neither in the beauty of flowers nor in the song of birds any fit comparison. Continually he pined that fate should not have allowed them to fulfill the vow which morning and evening was ever talked of between them, the vow that their lives should be as the twin birds that share a wing, the twin trees that share a bough. The rustling of the wind, the chirping of an insect would cast him into the deepest melancholy. And now Kokiden, who for a long while had not been admitted to his chamber, must needs sit in the moonlight, making music far on into the night. This evidently distressed him in the highest degree, and those ladies and courtiers who were with him were equally shocked and distressed on his behalf. But the offending lady was one who stood much upon her dignity, and she was determined to behave as though nothing of any consequence had taken place in the palace. And now the moon had set. The emperor thought of the girl's mother in the house, amid the thickets, and wondered, making a poem of the thought. with what feelings she had watched the sinking of the autumn moon. For even we men above the clouds were weeping when it sank. He raised the torches high in their sockets, and still sat up. But at last he heard voices coming from the watch-house of the right, and knew that the hour of the bull had struck. Then, lest he should be seen, he went into his chamber, and found he could not sleep, and was up before daybreak. But, as though he remembered the words, he knew not the dawn was at his window, of Issei's poem. He showed little attention to the affairs of his morning audience, scarcely touched his dried rice, and seemed but dimly aware of the viands on the great table, so that the carvers and waiting men groaned to see their master's plight, and all his servants, both men and women, kept on whispering to one another. What a senseless occupation his ours become, and supposed that he was obeying some extravagant vow. Regardless of his subjects' murmurings, he continually allowed his mind to wander from their affairs to his own, so that the scandal of his negligence was now as dangerous to the state as it had been before, and again there began to be whispered references to a certain emperor of another land. Thus the months and days passed, and, in the end, the young prince arrived at court. He had grown up to be a child of unrivaled beauty, and the emperor was delighted with him. In the spring, an heir to the throne was to be proclaimed, and the emperor was sorely tempted to pass over the firstborn prince in favor of the young child. But there was no one at court to support such a choice, and it was unlikely that it would be tolerated by the people. It would indeed bring danger rather than glory to the child, so he carefully concealed from the world that he had any such design, and gained great credit, men saying, though he dotes on the boy, there is at least some limit to his folly. And even the great ladies of the palace became a little easier in their minds. The grandmother remained inconsolable, and impatient to set out upon her search for the place where the dead lady's spirit dwelt. She soon expired. Again, the emperor was in great distress, and this time the boy, being now 6 years old, understood what had happened and wept bitterly. And often he spoke sadly of what he had seen when he was brought to visit the poor dead lady who had for many years been so kind to him. Henceforward, he always lived at the palace. When he became 7, he began to learn his letters, and his quickness was so unusual that his father was amazed, thinking that now no one would have the heart to be unkind to the child. The emperor began to take him to the apartments of Kokiden and the rest, saying to them, "Now that his mother is dead, I know that you will be nice to him." Thus the boy began to penetrate the royal curtain. The roughest soldier, the bitterest foeman, could not have looked on such a child without a smile. And Kokiden did not send him away. She had 2 daughters, who were indeed not such fine children as the little prince. He also played with the court ladies, who, because he was now very pretty and bashful in his ways, found endless amusement, as indeed did everyone else, in sharing his games. As for his serious studies, he soon learnt to send the sounds of zithern and flute flying gaily to the clouds. But if I were to tell you of all his accomplishments, you would think that he was soon going to become a bore. At this time, some Koreans came to court, and among them a fortune-teller. Hearing this, the emperor did not send for them to come to the palace, because of the law against the admission of foreigners which was made by the Emperor Uda. But in strict secrecy, he sent the prince to the stranger's quarters. He went under the escort of the Secretary of the Right, who was to introduce him as his own son. The fortune-teller was astonished by the boy's lineaments, and expressed his surprise by continually nodding his head. "He has the marks of one who might become a father of the state. And if this were his fate, he would not stop short at any lesser degree than that of a mighty king and emperor of all the land. But when I look again, I see that confusion and sorrow will attend his reign. But should he become a great officer of state and counselor of the realm, I see no happy issue, for he would be defying those kingly signs of which I spoke before. The secretary was a most talented, wise, and learned scholar, and now began to conduct an interesting conversation with the fortune-teller. They exchanged essays and poems, and the fortune-teller made a little speech, saying, "It has been a great pleasure to me on the eve of my departure to meet with a man of capacity so unusual, and though I regret my departure, I shall now take away most agreeable impressions of my visit." The little prince presented him with a very nice verse of poetry, at which he expressed boundless admiration, and offered the boy a number of handsome presents. In return, the emperor sent him a large reward from the imperial treasury. This was all kept strictly secret, but somehow or other, the heir apparent's grandfather, the minister of the right, and others of his party got wind of it, and became very suspicious. The emperor then sent for native fortune-tellers, and made trial of them, explaining that because of certain signs, which he had himself observed, he had hitherto refrained from making the boy a prince. With one accord they agreed that he had acted with great prudence, and the emperor determined not to set the child adrift upon the world as a prince without royal standing, or influence upon the mother's side. For he thought, "My own power is very insecure. I had best set him to watch on my behalf over the great officers of state." Thinking that he had thus agreeably settled the child's future, he set seriously to work upon his education, and saw to it that if he should be made perfect in every branch of art and knowledge, he showed such aptitude in all his studies that it seemed a pity he should remain a commoner. And as it had been decided that it would arouse suspicion if he were made a prince, the emperor consulted with certain doctors wise in the lore of the planets and the phases of the moon, and they, with one accord, recommended that he should be made a member of the Minamoto, or Gen, clan. So this was done. As the years went by, the emperor did not forget his lost lady, and though many women were brought to the palace in the hope that he might take pleasure in them, he turned them all away, believing that there was not in the world anyone like her whom he had lost. There was at that time a lady whose beauty was of great repute. She was the fourth daughter of the previous emperor, and it was said that her mother, the Dowager Empress, had brought her up with unrivaled care. A certain dame of the household, who had served the former emperor, was intimately acquainted with the young princess, having known her since childhood, and still having occasion to observe her from without. "I have served in 3 courts," said the dame, "and in all that time have seen none who could be likened to the departed lady, save the daughter of the empress mother. She indeed is a lady of rare beauty." So she spoke to the emperor, and he, much wondering what truth there was in it, listened with great attention. The empress mother heard of this with great alarm, for she remembered with what open cruelty the sinister Lady Kokiden had treated her former rival. And though she did not dare speak openly of her fears, she was managing to delay the girl's presentation, when suddenly she died. The emperor, hearing that the bereaved princess was in a very desolate condition, sent word gently, telling her that he should henceforward look upon her as though she were one of the lady princesses, his daughters. Her servants and guardians and her brother, Prince Hyokubyo, thought that life in the palace might distract her, and would at least be better than the gloomy desolation of her home. And so they sent her to the court. She lived in apartments called Fujitsubo, and was known by this name. The emperor could not deny that she bore an astonishing resemblance to his beloved. She was, however, of much higher rank, so that everyone was anxious to please her, and whatever happened, they were prepared to grant her the utmost license. Whereas the dead lady had been imperiled by the emperor's favor, only because the court was not willing to accept her. His old love did not grow dimmer, and though he sometimes found solace and distinction in shifting his thoughts from the lady who had died to the lady who was so much like her, yet life remained for him a sad business. Genji, he of the Minamoto clan, as he was now called, was constantly at the emperor's side. He was soon quite at his ease with the common run of ladies-in-waiting and the ladies of the wardrobe. So it was not likely he would be shy with one who was daily summoned to the emperor's apartments. It was but natural that all these ladies should vie eagerly with one another for the first place in Genji's affections, and there were many whom, in various ways, he admired very much. But most of them behaved in too grown-up fashion. Only one, the new princess, was pretty and quite young as well, and though she tried to hide from him, it was inevitable that they should often meet. He could not remember his mother, but the dame of the household had told him how very like to her the girl was, and this interested his childish fancy, and he would like to have been her great friend and lived with her always. One day the emperor said to her, "Do not be unkind to him. He is interested because he has heard that you are so like his mother. Do not think him impertinent, but behave nicely to him. You are indeed so like him in look and features that you might well be his mother." If he wasn't a kid, this would be very creepy. And so, young though he was, fleeting beauty took its hold upon his thoughts. He felt his first clear predilection. Kokoden had never loved this lady too well, and now her old enmity to Genji sprang up again. Her own children were reckoned to be of quite uncommon beauty, but in this they were no match for Genji, who was so lovely a boy that people called him Hikaru Genji, or Genji the Shining One. And Princess Fujitsubo, who also had many admirers, was called Princess Glittering Sunshine. Though it seemed a shame to put so lovely a child into man's dress, he was now 12 years old, and the time for his initiation was come. Yes, 12. You're a man now, Genji. 12 years old. The Emperor directed the preparations with tireless zeal, and insisted upon a magnificence beyond what was prescribed. The initiation of the heir apparent, which had last year been celebrated in the Southern Hall, was not a whit more splendid in its preparations. The ordering of the banquets that were to be given in various quarters, and the work of the treasurer and grain intendant, he supervised in person, fearing lest the officials should be remiss, and in the end all was perfection. The ceremony took place in the eastern wing of the Emperor's own apartments, and the throne was placed facing towards the east, with the seats of the initiate-to-be and his sponsor, the Minister of the Left, in front. Genji arrived at the hour of the monkey. He looked very handsome with his long, childish locks, and the sponsor, whose duty it had just been to bind them with the purple fillet, was sorry to think that all this would soon be changed, and even the clerk of the treasury seemed loath to sever those lovely tresses with the ritual knife. The Emperor, as he watched, remembered for a moment that what pride the mother would have taken in the ceremony, but soon drove the weak thought from his mind. Duly crowned, Genji went to his chamber, and, changing into man's dress, went down into the courtyard and performed the dance of homage, which he did with such grace that tears stood in every eye. And now the Emperor, whose grief had of late grown somewhat less insistent, was again overwhelmed by memories of the past. It had been feared that his delicate features would show to less advantage when he had put aside his childish dress, but on the contrary, he looked handsomer than ever. His sponsor, the minister of the left, had an only daughter whose beauty the heir apparent had noticed. But now the father began to think he would not encourage that match, but would offer her to Genji. He sounded the emperor upon this, and found that he would be very glad to obtain for the boy the advantage of so powerful a connection. When the courtiers assembled to drink the love cup, the love cup? Okay. There's no footnote on that one, so there's no explanation to be had. Genji came and took his place among the other princes. The minister of the left came up and whispered something in his ear, but the boy blushed and could think of no reply. A chamberlain now came over to the minister and brought him a summons to wait upon his majesty immediately. When he arrived before the throne, a lady of the wardrobe handed him the great white inner garment and the maid's skirt, which were his ritual due as sponsor to the prince. Then, when he had made him drink out of the royal cup, the emperor recited a poem in which he prayed that the binding of the purple fillet might symbolize the union of their two houses. And the minister answered him that nothing should sever this union save the fading of the purple band. Then he descended the long stairs, and from the courtyard performed the grand obeisance. Here, too, were shown the horses from the royal stables and the hawks from the royal falconry that had been decreed as presents for Genji. At the foot of the stairs, the princes and courtiers were lined up to receive their bounties, and gifts of every kind were showered upon them. That day, the hampers and fruit baskets were distributed in accordance with the emperor's directions by the learned secretary of the right, and boxes of cake and presents lay about so thick that one could scarcely move. Such profusion had not been seen even at the heir apparent's initiation. That night, Genji went to the minister's house, where his betrothal was celebrated with great splendor. It was thought that the little prince looked somewhat childish and delicate, but his beauty astonished everyone. Only the bride, who was 4 years older, regarded him as a mere baby, and was rather ashamed of him. Okay, the child bride is the most sensible in the room. Cool. The emperor still demanded Genji's attendance at the palace, so he did not set up a house of his own. In his inmost heart, he was always thinking of how much nicer she was than anyone else, and only wanted to be with people who were like her. But alas, no one was the least like her. Everyone seemed to make a great deal of fuss about Princess Aoi, his betrothed, but he could see nothing nice about her. The girl at the palace now filled all his childish thoughts, and this obsession became a misery to him. Now that he was a man, he could no longer frequent the women's quarters, as he had been wont to do. But sometimes, when an entertainment was afoot, he found comfort in hearing her voice dimly blending with the sound of zithern or flute, and felt his grown-up existence to be unendurable. You and me both, kid. After an absence of 5 or 6 days, he would occasionally spend 2 or 3 at his betrothed's house. His father-in-law, attributing this negligence to his extreme youth, was not at all perturbed, and always received him warmly. Whenever he came, the most interesting and agreeable of the young people of the day were asked to meet him, and endless trouble was taken in arranging games to amuse him. The Shigesa, one of the rooms which had belonged to his mother, was allotted to him as his official quarters in the palace, and the servants who had waited on her were now gathered together again and formed his suite. His grandmother's house was falling into decay. The Imperial Office of Works was ordered to repair it. The grouping of the trees and disposition of the surrounding hills had always made the place delightful. Now the basin of the lake was widened, and many other improvements were carried out. If only I were going to live here with someone whom I liked, thought Genji sadly. Damn, kid. Some say that the name of Hikaru, the Shining One, was given to him in admiration by the Korean fortune teller. Alright, and this is the end of chapter 1, Kiritsubo. And now we have chapter 2, the broom tree. But before that, let's take a short break. We have a little bit to digest with all that, because I know we've gone into this expecting things to be A, a little dense. The opening chapters of anything always are. And B, a little weird, because let us not forget, through the chapter, Genji is aged a little bit, but at the end of the chapter, this kid is 12, is engaged to a 16-year-old, and is pining for a 14-year-old. All while everyone around is thinking, oh, how beautiful this little boy is. So, different times. Imperial intrigue. Just let it sink in. It's fine. It's fine. I promise. Alright, guys, let's go ahead and take a few minutes, top up our drinks, stretch our legs, walk about a little bit, and we'll be back in just a little while to continue from chapter 2 of Genji Monogatari. Alright, we are back. Alright, so we're going to try and get through the next chapter. However, it is about twice the length-ish of the last one, so there's a very real possibility that we'll have to stop about halfway through this chapter. This is... The length of the different chapters is sort of inconsistent. And this volume is 9 chapters, so we'll split it up however it needs to be, but we'll probably get through this whole thing in a week or two, and then it'll transition us nicely into our next project. Alright, so let's jump back in now with Chapter 2 of Genji Monogatari. Yeah, the translation is kind of a little clunky, a little overbearing in a few places. You can kind of see the changes in how translation has been approached in the intervening years. Because this is it has a very sort of Oxford style of translation to it that you see with a lot of things like early translations of like Mencius and things like that, where it's all very stilted and loses a lot of the nuance. I think it's just a little different, but yeah, and then the translation itself is gonna... A lot of the things may not have been split up in chapters the same way. So I read it in the original Japanese in college, and I don't think it was broken up in the same way at all. There were like different sections, but it wasn't like chapters in the same way, or at least the breaking points weren't the same. So, of course I did, yes. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what we can get through in this second chapter and see how things start to shape up. Because Genji he's now a man, 12 years old, robust, ready to take on the world. But yes, we've gotten through the pre-Genji and very early Genji, and now we're getting into the point where he's becoming the actual central character. So that first chapter was all preamble. All right, Chapter 2, The Broom Tree. Genji the Shining One. That is going to bother me a lot. He knew that the bearer of such a name could not escape much scrutiny, and jealous censure that his lightest dallyings would be proclaimed to posterity. Fearing, then, lest he should appear to after ages as a mere good-for-nothing and trifler, and knowing that, so accursed is the blabbering of gossips' tongues, his most secret acts might come to light, he was obliged always to act with great prudence, and to preserve at least the outward appearance of respectability. Thus, nothing really romantic ever happened to him, and Katana no Shosho would have scoffed at his story. While he was still a captain of the guard and was spending most of his time at the palace, his infrequent visits to the Great Hall were taken as a sign that some secret passion had made its imprint on his heart. But in reality, the frivolous, commonplace, straight-ahead amours of his companions did not in the least interest him, and it was a curious trait in his character that when, on rare occasions, despite all resistance, love did gain a hold upon him, it was always in the most improbable and hopeless entanglement that he became involved. It was the season of the long rains. For many days there had not been a fine moment, and the court was keeping a strict fast. The people at the Great Hall were becoming very impatient of Genji's long residence at the palace, but the young lords, who were court pages, liked waiting upon Genji better than upon anyone else, always managing to put out his clothes and decorations in some marvelous new way. Among these brothers, his greatest friend was the equerry, To no Chujo, with whom, above all other companions of his playtime, he found himself familiar and at ease. This lord, too, found the house which his brother-in-law, the Minister of the Right, had been at pains to build for him, somewhat oppressive, while his father's house he, like Genji, found the splendors somewhat dazzling, so that he ended by becoming Genji's constant companion at court. They shared both studies and play, and were inseparable companions on every sort of occasion, so that soon all formalities were dispensed with between them, and the innermost secrets of their hearts were freely exchanged. It was on a night when the rain never ceased its dismal downpour. There were not many people about in the palace, and Genji's rooms seemed even quieter than usual. He was sitting by the lamp, looking at various books and papers. Suddenly he began pulling some letters out of the drawers of a desk, which stood nearby. This aroused To no Chujo's curiosity. "Some of them I can show to you," said Genji, "but there are others which I had rather—" "It is just those which I want to see. Ordinary, commonplace letters are very much alike, and I do not suppose that yours differ much from mine. What I want to see are passionate letters written in moments of resentment, letters hinting consent, letters written at dusk." He begged so eagerly that Genji let him examine the drawers. It was not indeed likely that he had put any very important or secret documents in the ordinary desk. He would have hidden them away much further from sight. So he felt sure that the letters in those drawers would be nothing to worry about. After turning over a few of them, "What an astonishing variety!" To no Chujo exclaimed, and then began guessing at the writers' names, and made one or two good hits. More often he was wrong, and Genji, amused by his puzzled air, said very little, but generally managed to lead him astray. At last he took the letters back, saying, "But you too must have a large collection. Show me some of yours, and my desk will open to you with better will." "I have none that you would care to see," said To no Chujo, and he continued, "I have at least discovered that there exists no woman of whom one can say, 'Here is perfection. This is indeed she.' There are many who have the superficial art of writing a good running hand, or, if occasion requires, of making a quick repartee. But there are few who will stand the ordeal of any further test. Usually their minds are entirely occupied by admiration for their own accomplishments, and their abuse of all rivals creates a most unpleasant impression. Some, again, are adored by overfond parents. These have been since childhood guarded behind lattice windows, and no knowledge of them is allowed to reach the outer world, save that of their excellence in some accomplishment or art. And this may indeed sometimes arouse our interest. She is pretty and graceful, and has not yet mixed at all with the world. Such a girl, by closely copying some model and applying herself with great industry, will often succeed in really mastering one of the minor and ephemeral arts. Her friends are careful to say nothing of her defects, and to exaggerate her accomplishments, and while we cannot altogether trust their praise, we cannot believe that their judgment is entirely astray. And when we take steps to test their statements, we are invariably disappointed." To no Chujo is extremely jaded. This kid is a teenager, and presumably a teenager or a young man, and he has all the air of the most diehard of incels about him. Like, calm down, kid. Calm down. He paused, seeming to be slightly ashamed of the cynical tone which he had adopted, and added, "I know my experience is not large, but that is the conclusion I have come to so far." Then Genji, smiling, "And are there any who lack even one accomplishment?" "No doubt, but in such a case it is unlikely that anyone would be successfully decoyed. The number of those who have nothing to recommend them, and of those in whom nothing but good can be found, is probably equal. I divide women into 3 classes. Those of high rank and birth are made such a fuss of, and their weak points are so completely concealed, that we are certain to be told that they are paragons. About those of the middle class, everyone is allowed to express his own opinion, and we shall have much conflicting evidence to sift. As for the lower classes, they do not concern us. The completeness with which Tono Chujo disposed of the question amused Genji, who said, "It will not always be so easy to know into which of these 3 classes a woman ought to be put. For sometimes people of high rank sink to the most abject positions, while others of common birth rise to be high officers, where self-important faces redecorate the inside of their houses and think themselves as good as anyone. How are we to deal with such cases?" At this point, they were joined by Hidari no Uma no Kami and Toshikibu no Jo, who said they had also come to the palace to keep the fast. As both of them were great lovers and good talkers, Tono Chujo handed over to them the decision of Genji's question. And in the discussion which followed, many unflattering things were said. Uma no Kami spoke first. "However high a lady may rise, if she does not come of an adequate stock, the world will think very differently of her from what it would be of one born to such honors. But if through adverse fortune a lady of the highest rank finds herself in friendless misery, the noble breeding of her mind is soon forgotten, and she becomes an object of contempt. I think then that, taking all things into account, we must put such ladies too into the middle class. But when we come to classify the daughters of Zuryo, who are sent to labor at the affairs of distant provinces, they have such ups and downs that we may reasonably put them too into the middle class. Then there are ministers of the 3rd and 4th classes without cabinet rank. These are generally thought less of even than the humdrum ordinary officials. They are usually of quite good birth, but have much less responsibility than ministers of state, and consequently much greater peace of mind. Girls born into such households are brought up in complete security from want or deprivation of any kind, and indeed often amid surroundings of the utmost luxury and splendor. Many of them grow up into women whom it would be folly to despise. Some have been admitted to court, where they have enjoyed a quite unexpected success, and of this I could cite many, many instances. Their success has generally been due to their having a lot of money," said Genji, smiling. "You should have known better than to say that." "You should have known better than to say that," said Tono Chujo, reproving him. And Uma no Kami went on, "There are some whose lineage and reputation are so high that it never occurs to one that their education could possibly be at fault. Yet, when we meet them, we find ourselves exclaiming in despair, 'How can they have contrived to grow up like this?' No doubt, the perfect woman in whom none of those essentials is lacking must somewhere exist, and it would not startle me to find her, but she would certainly be beyond the reach of a humble person like myself. Oh yes, very humble. And for that reason, I should like to put her in a category of her own, and not to count her in our present classification." "But suppose that behind some gateway overgrown with vineweed, in a place where no one knows there is a house at all, there should be locked away some creature of unimagined beauty. With what excitement should we discover her? The complete surprise of it, the upsetting of all our wise theories and classifications, would be likely, I think, to lay a strange and sudden enchantment upon us. I imagine her father rather large and gruff, her brother a surly, ill-looking fellow, locked away in an utterly blank and uninteresting bedroom. She will be subject to odd flights of fancy, so that in her hands the arts that others learn as trivial accomplishments will seem strangely full of meaning and importance. Or perhaps in some particular art she will thrill us by her delightful and unexpected mastery. such a one may perhaps be beneath the attention of those of you who are of flawless lineage, but for my part, I find it hard to banish her. And here he looked at Shikibu Lojo, who wondered whether the description had been meant to apply to his own sisters, but said nothing. If it is difficult to choose even out of the top class, thought Genji, and began to doze. He was dressed in a suit of soft white silk, with a rough cloak carelessly slung over his shoulders, with belt and fastenings untied. In the light of the lamp against which he was leaning, he looked so lovely that one might have wished he were a girl. And they thought that even Uma no Kami's perfect woman, whom he had placed in a category of her own, would not be worthy of such a prince as Genji. The conversation went on. Many persons and things were discussed. Uma no Kami contended that perfection is equally difficult to find in other spheres. The sovereign is hard put to it to choose his ministers, but he at least has an easier task than the husband, for he does not entrust the affairs of his kingdom to 1, 2, or 3 persons alone, but sets up a whole system of superiors and subordinates. But when the mistress of a house is to be selected, a single individual must be found who will combine in her person many diverse qualities. It will not do to be too exacting. Let us be sure that the lady of our choice possesses certain tangible qualities which we admire, and if in other ways she falls short of our ideal, we must be patient and call to mind those qualities which first induced us to begin our courting. But even here we must beware, for there are some who in the selfishness of youth and flawless beauty are determined that not a dust flick shall fall upon them. In their letters they choose the most harmless topics, but yet contrive to color the very texture of the written signs with a tenderness that vaguely disquiets us. But such a one, when we have at last secured a meeting, will speak so low that she can scarcely be heard, and the few faint sentences that she murmurs beneath her breath serve only to make her more mysterious than ever. All this may seem to be the pretty shrinking of girlish modesty, but we may later find that what held her back was the very violence of her passions. Or, again, where all seems plain sailing, the perfect companion will turn out to be too impressionable, and will, upon the most inappropriate occasions, display her affections in so ludicrous a way that we begin to wish ourselves rid of her. Then there is the zealous housewife, who, regardless of her appearance, twists her hair behind her ears and devotes herself entirely to the details of our domestic welfare. The husband, in his comings and goings about the world, is certain to see and hear many things which he cannot discuss with strangers, but would gladly talk over with an intimate, who could listen with sympathy and understanding, someone who could laugh with him or weep if need be. It often happens, too, that some political event will greatly perturb or amuse him, and he sits apart, longing to tell someone about it. He suddenly laughs at some secret recollection or sighs audibly, but the wife only says lightly, "What is the matter?" and shows no interest. This is apt to be very trying. Uma no Kami considered several other cases, but he reached no definite conclusion, and, sighing deeply, he continued, "We will then, as I have suggested, let birth and beauty go by the board. Let her be the simplest and most guileless of creatures, so long as she is honest and of a peaceable disposition, that, in the end, we may not lack a place of trust. And if some other virtue chances to be hers, we shall treasure it as a godsend. But if we discover in her some small defect, it shall not be too closely scrutinized, and we may be sure that if she is strong in the virtues of tolerance and amiability, her outward appearances will not be beyond measure harsh. There are those who carry forbearance too far, and affecting not to notice things, which cry out for redress, seem to be paragons of misused fidelity. But suddenly a time comes when such a one can restrain herself no longer, and leaving her behind her a poem couched in pitiful language and calculated to rouse the most painful sentiments of remorse, she flies to some remote village in the mountains or some desolate seashore, and for a long while all trace of her is lost. When I was a boy, the ladies-in-waiting used to tell me sad tales of this kind. I never doubted that the sentiments expressed in them were real, and I wept profusely. But now I am beginning to suspect that such sorrows are for the most part affectation. She has left behind her, this lady whom we are imagining, a husband who is probably still fond of her. She is making herself very unhappy, and by disappearing in this way is causing him some unspeakable anxiety. Perhaps only for the ridiculous purpose of putting his affection to the test. Then comes along some admiring friend crying, "What a heart! What depth of feeling!" She becomes more lugubrious than ever, and finally enters a nunnery. When she decided on this step, she was perfectly sincere, and had not the slightest intention of ever returning to the world. Then some female friend hears of it, and "Poor thing," she cries, "in what an agony of mind she must have been to do this," and visits her in her cell. When the husband, who has never ceased to mourn for her, hears what she has become, he bursts into tears. And some servant or old nurse, seeing this, bustles off to the nunnery with tales of the husband's despair, and, "Oh, madam, what a shame, what a shame!" Then the nun, forgetting where and what she is, raises her hand to her head to straighten her hair, and finds that it has been shorn away. In helpless misery she sinks to the floor, and do what she will. And tears begin to flow. Now all is lost, for since she cannot at every moment be praying for strength, there creeps into her the sinful thought that she did ill to become a nun, and so often does she commit this sin that even Buddha must think her wickeder now than she was before she took her vows, and she feels certain that these terrible thoughts are leading her soul to the blackest hell. But if the karma of their past lives should chance to be strongly weighted against departing, she will be found and captured before she has taken her final vows. In such a case, their life will be beyond endurance, unless she be fully determined, come good or ill, this time, to close her eyes to all that goes amiss. Damn, okay, so Umanokami has got some thoughts. Bro has got some ideas going on, and I guess every friend circle has someone that is possessed of certain opinions, certain strong opinions, but maybe this friend needs to shut up a little bit. Just a bit. Again, there are others who must needs be forever mounting guard over their own and their husband's affections. Such a one, if she sees in him not a fault indeed, but even the slightest inclination to stray, makes a foolish scheme, declaring with indignation that she will have no more to do with him. But even if a man's fancy should chance indeed to have gone somewhat astray, yet his earlier affection may still be strong, and in the end will return to its old haunts. Now, by her tantrums, she has made a rift that cannot be joined. Whereas she who, when some small wrong calls for silent rebuke, shows by a glance that she is not unaware, but when some large offense demands admonishment, knows how to hint without severity, will end by standing in her master's affections better than ever she stood before. For often the sight of our own forbearance will give our neighbor strength to rule his mutinous affections. But she, whose tolerance and forgiveness know no bounds, though this may seem to proceed from the beauty and amiability of her disposition, is in fact displaying the shallowness of her feeling. The unmoored boat must needs drift with the stream. Are you not of this mind? And Tono Chujo nodded. Some, he said, have imagined that by arousing a baseless suspicion in the mind of the beloved, we can revive a waning devotion. But this experiment is very dangerous. Those who recommend it are confident that so long as resentment is groundless, one need only suffer it in silence, and all will soon be well. I have observed, however, that this is by no means the case. But when all is said and done, there can be no greater virtue in woman than this, that she should, with gentleness and forbearance, meet every wrong whatsoever that falls to her share. He thought, as he said this, of his own sister, Princess Aoi. but was disappointed and piqued to discover that Genji, whose comments he awaited, was fast asleep. Okay, these guys were having a very in-depth discussion of Andrew Tate proportions, and Genji falls asleep and ignores them. I actually dig that. That's pretty great. Umanokami was an expert in such discussions, and now stood preening his feathers. Tono Chujo was disposed to hear what more he had to say, and was now at pains to humor and encourage him. "It is with women," said Umanokami, "as it is with the works of craftsmen. The wood carver can fashion whatever he will, yet his products are but toys of the moment, to be glanced at in jest, not fashioned according to any precept or law. When times change, the carver too will change his style and make new trifles to hit the fancy of the passing day. But there is another kind of artist, who sets more soberly about his work, striving to give real beauty to the things which men actually use, and to give them the shapes which tradition has ordained. This maker of real things must not for a moment be confused with a carver of idle toys." In the painter's workshop, too, there are many excellent artists chosen for their proficiency in ink drawing, and indeed, they are all so clever it is hard to set one above the other, but all of them are at work on subjects intended to impress and surprise. One paints the mountain of Horai, another a raging sea monster riding a storm, another ferocious animals from the land beyond the sea, or faces of imaginary demons, letting their fancy run wildly riot. They have no thought of beauty, but only of how best they may astonish the beholder's eye. And, though nothing in their pictures is real, all is probable. But ordinary hills and rivers, just as they are, houses such as you may see anywhere, with all their real beauty and harmony of form, quietly to draw such scenes as this, or to show what lies beyond some intimate hedge that is folded away far from the world, and thick trees upon some unheroic hill. And all this with befitting care for composition, proportioned like. Such works demand the highest master's utmost skill, and must needs draw the common craftsman into 1,000 blunders. So too, in handwriting, we see some who aimlessly prolong their cursive strokes this way or that, and and hope their flourishes will be mistaken for genius. But true penmanship preserves, in every letter, its balance and form, and though at first some letters may seem but half-formed, yet when we compare them with the copybooks, we find that there is nothing at all amiss. So it is in these trifling matters, and how much more, the more in judging of the human heart, should we distrust all fashionable airs and graces, all tricks and smartness. I learnt only to please the outward gaze. This I first understood some while ago, and if you will have patience with me, I will tell you the story. Patience indeed. So saying, he came and sat a little closer to them, and Genji woke up. Tono Chujo, in rapt attention, was sitting with his cheek propped upon his hand. Umanokami's whole speech that night was indeed very much like a chaplain's sermon about the ways of the world. It was rather absurd. But upon such occasions as this, we are easily led on into discussing our own ideas and most private secrets without the least reserve. It happened when I was young, and in an even more humble position than I am today. Umanokami continued. I was in love with a girl who, like the drudging, faithful wife of whom I spoke a little while ago, was not a full-sail beauty, and I, in my youthful vanity, thought she was all very well for the moment, but would never do for the wife of so fine a fellow as I. She made an excellent companion in times when I was at loose end, but she was of a disposition so violently jealous that I could have put up with a little less devotion if only she had been somewhat less fiercely ardent and exacting. Thus, I kept thinking, vexed by her unrelenting suspicions. But then I would remember her ceaseless devotion to the interests of one who was, after all, a person of no account, and full of remorse. I made sure that, with a little patience on my part, she should one day learn to school her jealousy. It was her habit to minister to my smallest wants, even before I myself was aware of them. Whatever she felt was lacking in her, she strove to acquire. And where she knew that in some quality of mind she still fell behind my desires, she was at pains never to show her deficiency in such a way as might vex me. Thus, in one way or another, she was always busy in forwarding my affairs, and she hoped that if all down to the last dewdrop, as they say, were conducted as I should wish, this would be set down to her credit, and help to balance the defects in her person which, meek and obliging as she might be, could not, she fondly imagined, fail to offend me. And at this time she even hid herself from strangers, lest their poor opinion of her looks should put me out of countenance. I, meanwhile, becoming used to her homely looks, was well content with her character, save for this one article of jealousy. And here she showed no amendment. Then I began to think to myself, surely, since she seems so anxious to please, so timid, there must be some way of giving her a fright, which will teach her a lesson, so that for a while at least we may have a respite from this accursed business. And though I knew it would cost me dear, I determined to make a pretense of giving her up, thinking that since she was so fond of me, this would be the best way to teach her a lesson. Accordingly, I behaved with the greatest coldness to her, and she, as usual, began her jealous fit, and behaved with such folly, that in the end I said to her, if you want to be rid forever of one who loves you dearly, you are going the right way about it by all these endless poutings over nothing at all. But if you want to go on with me, you must give up suspecting some deep intrigue each time you fancy that I am treating you unkindly. Do this, and you may be sure I shall continue to love you dearly. It may be well that, as time goes on, I shall rise a little higher in the world, and then... I thought I had managed matters very cleverly, though perhaps in the heat of the moment I might have spoken somewhat too roughly. She smiled faintly, and answered that if it were only a matter of bearing for a while with my failures and disappointments, that did not trouble her at all, and she would gladly wait till I became a person of consequence. But it is a hard task, she said, to go on year after year, enduring your coldness and waiting the time when you will at last learn to behave to me with some decency. And therefore I agree with you that the time has come when we had better go each his own way. Then, in a fit of wild and uncontrollable jealousy, she began to pour upon me a torrent of bitter reproaches, and, with a woman's savagery, she suddenly seized my little finger and bit deep into it. The unexpected pain was difficult to bear, but composing myself, I said tragically, now you have put this mark upon me, I shall get on worse than ever in polite society. As for promotion, I shall be considered a disgrace to the meanest public office, and unable to cut a genteel figure in any capacity. I shall be obliged to withdraw myself completely from the world. You and I, at any rate, shall certainly not meet again. And bending my injured finger, as I turned to go, I recited the verse. As on bent hand I count the times that we have met, it is not one finger only that bears witness to my pain. And she, all of a sudden, bursting into tears, if still in your heart only you look for pains to count, then were our hands best employed in parting. After a few more words, I left her, not for a moment thinking that all was over. This kid is absolutely insufferable. Days went by and no news. I began to be restless. One night, when I had been at the palace for the rehearsal of the festival music, heavy sleep was falling, and I stood at the spot where those of us who came from the palace had dispersed, unable to make up my mind which way to go, for in no direction had I anything which could properly be called a home. I might, of course, take a room in the palace precincts, but I shivered to think of the cheerless grandeur that would surround me. Suddenly, I began to wonder what she was thinking, and how she was looking and brushing the snow off my shoulders, I set out for her home. I own I felt uneasy, but I thought that after so long a time her anger must surely have somewhat abated. Inside the room a lamp showed dimly. Turned to the wall, some undergarments were hung out upon a large, warmly quilted couch. The bed hangings were drawn up, and I made sure that she was, for some reason, actually expecting me. I was priding myself on having made so lucky a hit when suddenly not at home. And on questioning the maid, I learnt that she had but that very night gone to her parents' home, leaving only a few necessary servants behind. The fact that she had till now sent no poem or conciliatory message seemed to show some hardening of heart, and had already disquieted me. Now, I began to fear that her accursed suspiciousness and jealousy had but been a stratagem to make me grow wary of her. And, though I could recall no further proof of this, I fell into great despair. And, to show her that, though we no longer met, I still thought of her and planned for her, I got to her some stuff for a dress, choosing a most delightful and unusual shade of color, and a material that I knew she would be glad to have. For, after all, I thought, she cannot want to put me altogether out of her head. When I informed her of this purchase, she did not rebuff me, nor make any attempt to hide from me, but to all my questions she answered quietly and composedly, without any sign that she was ashamed of herself. At last she told me that if I went on as before, she could never forgive me, but if I would promise to live more quietly, she would take me back again. Seeing that she still hankered after me, I determined to school her a little further yet, and said that I could make no conditions and must be free to live as I chose. So the tug-of-war went on, but it seems that it hurt her far more than I knew, for in a little while she fell into a decline and died, leaving me aghast at the upshot of my wanton game, and now I felt that, whatever faults she might have had, her devotion alone would have made her a fit wife for me. I remembered how, both in trivial talk and in consideration of important matters, she had never once shown herself at a loss, how in the dyeing of brocades she rivaled the goddess of Tatsutsa, who tints the autumn leaves, and how in needlework and the like she was not less skilful than Tanabata, the weaving lady of the sky. Here he stopped, gently distressed at the recollection of the lady's many talents and virtues. Okay, buddy. Bro. Are you sure your name isn't Henry? Because I have a distinct dislike for Umanokami here. I'm looking for something to link the two. Is, man, this guy's a prat. The weaving lady and the herd boy, said Tono Chujo, enjoy a love that is eternal. Had she but resembled the divine sempstress in this, you would not, I think, have minded her being a little less skilful with her needle. I wonder that with this rare creature in mind you pronounce the world to be so blank a place. Listen, replied Umanokami, about the same time there was another lady whom I used to visit. Of course there was another one. She was of higher birth than the first. Her skill in poetry, cursive writing, and lute-playing, her readiness of hand and tongue, were all marked enough to show that she was not a woman of trivial nature. And this indeed was allowed by those who knew her. To add to this, she was not ill-looking, and sometimes, when I needed a rest from my unhappy persecutress, I used to visit her secretly. In the end, I found that I had fallen completely in love with her. After the death of the other, I was in great distress, but it was no use brooding over the past, and I began to visit my new lady more and more often. I soon came to the conclusion that she was frivolous, and I had no confidence that I should have liked what went on when I was not there to see. I now visited her only at long intervals, and at last decided that she had another lover. It was during the godless month, on a beautiful moonlit night. As I was leaving the palace, I met a certain young courtier, who, when I told him that I was driving out to spend the night at Dynagon's, said that my way was his, and joined me. The road passed my lady's house, and here it was that he alighted, saying that he had an engagement which he should have been very sorry not to fulfill. The wall was half in ruins, and through its gaps I saw the shadowy waters of the lake. It would not have been easy, for even the moonbeams seemed to loiter here, to hasten past so lovely a place. And when he left his coach, I too left mine. At once this man, whom I now knew to be that other lover whose existence I had guessed, went and sat unconcernedly on the bamboo skirting of the portico, and began to gaze at the moon. The chrysanthemums were just in full bloom. The bright fallen leaves were tumbling and tussling in the wind. It was indeed a scene of wonderful beauty that met our eyes. Presently he took a flute out of the fold of his dress, and began to play upon it. Then, putting the flute aside, he began to murmur sweet as the shade and other catches. Soon a pleasant-sounding native zithern began to tune up somewhere within the house, and an ingenious accompaniment was fitted to his careless warblings. Her zithern was tuned to the autumn mode, and she played with so much tenderness and feeling that, though the music came from behind closed shutters, it sounded quite modern and passionate, and well accorded with the soft beauty of the moonlight. The courtier was ravished, and as he stepped forward to place himself right under her window, he turned to me and remarked in a self-satisfied way that among the fallen leaves no other footstep had left its mark. Then, plucking a chrysanthemum, he sang, "Strains at the music of your lute, these matchless flowers and all the beauty of the night have lured no other feet to linger at your door." And then, beseeching her pardon for his halting verses, he begged her to play again while one was still near who longed so passionately to hear her. When he paid her many other compliments, the lady answered in an affected voice with the verse, "Would that I had some song that might detain the flute that blends its note with the low rustling of the autumn leaves." After these blandishments, still unsuspecting, she took up the 13-stringed lute, and, tuning it to the banjiki mode, she cluttered at the strings with all the frenzy that fashion now demands. It was a fine performance, no doubt, but I cannot say that it made a very agreeable impression upon me. A man may amuse himself well enough by trifling from time to time with some lady at the court, will get what pleasure he can out of it while he is with her, and not trouble his head about what goes on when he is not there. This lady, too, I only saw from time to time, but such was her situation, that I had once fondly imagined myself the only occupant of her thoughts. However, that night's work dissolved the last shred of my confidence, and I never saw her again. These two experiences, falling to my lot while I was still so young, early deprived me of any hope from women, and since that time my view of them has but grown the blacker. No doubt, to you at your age, they seem very entrancing, these dewdrops on the grass that fall at their touch, these glittering hailstones that melt if gathered in the hand. But when you are a little older, you will think as I do. Take my advice in this at least. Beware caressing manners and soft, entangling ways. For if you are so rash as to let them lead you astray, you will soon find yourselves cutting a very silly figure in the world. Tono Chujo, as usual, nodded his assent, and Genji's smile seemed such as to show that he too accepted Umanokami's advice. "Your two stories were certainly very dismal," he said, laughing, and here Tono Chujo interposed. "I will tell you a story about myself. There was a lady whose acquaintance I was obliged to make with great secrecy, but her beauty well rewarded my pains, and though I had no thought of making her my wife, I grew so fond of her that I soon found I could not put her out of my head, and she seemed to have complete confidence in me. Such confidence, indeed, that when from time to time I was obliged to behave in such a way as might well have aroused her resentment, she seemed not to notice that anything was amiss, and even when I neglected her for many weeks, she treated me as though I were still coming every day. In the end, indeed, I found this readiness to receive me whenever and however I came
very painful, and determined for the future to merit her strange confidence. Her parents were dead, and this was perhaps why, since I was all she had in the world, she treated me with such loving meekness, despite the many wrongs I did her. I must own that my resolution did not last long, and I was soon neglecting her worse than before. During this time, I did not hear of it till afterwards, someone who had discovered our friendship began to send her veiled messages, which cruelly frightened and distressed her. Knowing nothing of the trouble she was in, although I often thought of her, I neither came nor wrote to her for a long while. Just when she was in her worst despair, a child was born, and at last, in her distress, she plucked a blossom of the flower that is called Child of my Heart, and sent it to me.
Okay, hold up. Hold up. So, Tono Chujo, basically a Tate bro, but a low-level one, has been leading this lady on, got her pregnant and just dicked off, and then he's like stressed when she sends him a flower. People are just awful all the time, everywhere. It doesn't matter what, it's East, West, modern, antiquity. Everyone's just right bastards. Damn. And here, Tono Chujo's eyes filled with tears. Well, said Genji, and did she write a message to go with it? Oh, nothing very out of the ordinary, said Tono Chujo. She wrote, though tattered be the hillman's hedge, deign sometimes to look with kindness upon the child flower that grows so sweetly there. This brought me to her side. As usual, she did not reproach me, but she looked sad enough. And when I considered the dreary desolation of this home, where every object wore an aspect no less depressing than the wailing voices of the crickets in the grass, she seemed to me like some unhappy princess in an ancient story, and wishing her to feel that it was for the mother's sake and not the child's that I had come, I answered with a poem in which I called the child flower by its other name, a bedflower, and she replied with a poem that darkly hinted at the cruel tempest which had attended the bedflower's birth. She spoke lightly and did not seem to be downright angry with me, and when a few tears fell, she was at great pains to hide them, and seemed more distressed at the thought that I might imagine her to be unhappy than actually resentful of my conduct towards her. So I went away with an easy mind, and it was some while before I came again. When at last I returned, she had utterly disappeared, and if she is alive, she must be living a wretched, vagrant life. If while I still loved her, she had but shown some outward sign of her resentment, she would not have ended thus as an outcast and wanderer, for I should never have dared to leave her so long neglected, and might in the end have acknowledged her and made her mine forever. The child, too, was a sweet creature, and I have spent much time in searching for them, but still without success. Everyone is awful! Holy shit! It is, I fear, as sorrowful a tale as that which Uma no Kami has told you. I, unfaithful, thought that I was not missed, and she, still loved, was in no better case than one whose love is not returned. I, indeed, am fast forgetting her, but she, it may be, cannot put me out of her mind, and I fear there may be nights when thoughts that she would gladly banish burn fiercely in her breast. For now I fancy she must be living a comfortless and unprotected life. When all is said and done, said Uma no Kami, my friend, though I pine for her now that she is gone, was a sad plague to me while I had her, and we must own that such a one will in the end be sure to make us wish ourselves well rid of her. The zithern player had much talent to her credit, but was a great deal too light-headed,
and your diffident lady, Tono Chujo, seems to me to be a very suspicious case. The world appears to be so constructed that we shall, in the end, be always at a loss to make a reasoned choice. Despite all our picking, sifting, and comparing, we shall never succeed in finding this, in all ways and to all lengths, adorable and impeccable female. I can only suggest the goddess Kichijo, said Tono Chujo, and I fear that intimacy with so holy and majestic a being might prove to be impracticable. All right, so we are about halfway through this chapter, and at this point they're shifting the conversation to somebody else, so someone else's stories, and actually, it's only going to get worse. So let's go ahead and call this our stopping point for the evening. Let's see. Yep. Yeah, right at the halfway point through this chapter, and it's a slight break in the conversation. So yeah, it should work out pretty well. We're at about 16% of the way through or so. So yeah, as expected, this will probably take us about a week and a half, 2 weeks-ish, which should lead us right nicely into a good time to start our next project, which will be Wizard of Oz next. Because it'll be right in toward around Thanksgiving time. So we've got November pretty well planned for at this point. So this is, so far, an interesting read. The first chapter, as expected with many first chapters, is kind of dry. It's introducing concepts, people, developing the main character, and sort of setting the stage. This second chapter is kind of setting Genji apart, and also giving some insight into his surroundings. Those surroundings being absolutely awful people. But it's setting him as different from them, because while they were going on about it, he slept. And presumably, as they're going on with their stories, he's being judgy as all hell, as would only be right. So it's sort of building upon the first chapter and setting Genji up as a bit of a paragon of virtue and the lovely inside and out sort of person. We'll see how much that carries on, but that is definitely his reputation. He's the loveliest man around. He's the lover for the ages. He's the Don Juan of Japan. So I expect it will mostly carry on. But this is still building up to that point. He's still a boy, mind you. So we'll probably see by the end of tomorrow night or so, as that starts to develop a little bit further, and we'll see him come more into his own. So far, it's been mostly those around him talking and giving contrast to him. We'll start to have some of his own words a little bit more frequently as we go on. But yeah, so as we said when we started out, we've had a bit of a Western bias through a lot of our readings. Basically everything that we've read since we started. So getting a shift to a titan of literature from the other hemisphere is a good change of pace. I'm enjoying it so far. I hope you guys are. It is kind of dry. The translation is a little stilted, but it carries things along reasonably well. It's an easier read than something like Le Morte d'Arthur was. It's more modern, less archaic in styling. It is still a novel, so it is meant to be read for enjoyment, not the passing along of legends. So it's so far so good. We're gonna give it a few more days to really develop and hopefully catch our attention, but I'm enjoying it so far. Alright, and with that, I've had a very long day, so I will, unfortunately, have to wrap us up tonight with a little less banter than I normally would like. let's go ahead and wrap up here. We will be back tomorrow at our normal time, where we will continue from partway through Chapter 2 of Genji Monogatari. And I hope that everyone will join us again. If you have not yet, I encourage you to put a like on the stream, maybe a subscription to the channel, let the algorithm know we're doing fun things, and catch some notifications for when we go live. Despite the fact that I always go live at the same time, and my schedule has been pretty stable for almost a year now. It's kind of crazy, actually. I'd rather not think about that too hard. Anyway, I hope everyone has a wonderful night. And, yeah. Bye now.